of course, the governments often put security and economic interests ahead of human rights. How can advocates push for rights in such a world without being dismissed as unrealistic?
Well, I think it's useful you know, to look behind these claims. Of course, it's easy to say, "Oh, I'm violating human rights because we're going to grow economically." But if you look around the world, I mean, the autocrats who claim to be promoting economic development are often just serving themselves. Every once in a while, you get somebody like Lee Kuan Yew, the former Singaporean prime minister, who ran an autocratic state, but also built it economically. That is by far and away the exception. Much more often, you get somebody like, Venezuela's Maduro, or, former dictator in Zimbabwe, Mugabe, or in Zaire, Mobutu. These are people who repressed rights, were completely corrupt, totally destroyed the economy. I mean, look at Venezuela. That should be a rich country. It has massive amounts of oil. Some people say the most in the world, in terms of reserves. It's, shed 7 million refugees. It's falling apart economically. That's what happens when you have, autocrats who claim to be doing this for the betterment of the people, but inevitably they serve themselves and their cronies. On the issue of security, I faced this, I describe in the book how we faced it with George W. Bush's so-called war on terrorism. And, they never admitted that they were torturing. They always pretended it was, just enhanced interrogation techniques. That was their euphemism. But they were essentially saying, we need to torture to protect you. And, ultimately, we were able to persuade the American people in the US Congress that, in fact, torture was making Americans less safe because it was completely alienating the communities that were most likely to have information about a possible terrorist threat. And torture was like the best friend of the terrorist recruiters. If somebody is tortured or if a member of your family is tortured, you are much more likely to join a terrorist group than if you've been treated lawfully. And so, again, I don't buy this argument that violations of human rights help security. Is Israel safer today because it committed a genocide in Gaza? Or is it just generating, kind of a new generation of Palestinians who hate Israel and who, unless there ultimately is a Palestinian state, are going to devote themselves to ensuring that there is one by whatever means? So I just think that these kinds of human rights shortcuts, ostensibly for the purpose of economic or security betterment, is just utterly misguided. That's not how the world works.